Back when I was a junior in high school, my older brother and I worked at a local restaurant in an outlet shopping center. We both waited tables and also helped out with various tasks. After my brother graduated and went off to college, I continued working there for a while. This story happened a couple of years ago, a few months before I left the job. On this particular Friday night, I was scheduled for a later shift. The restaurant closed at midnight, and I usually finished earlier due to school. But that night, I was closing with the manager. Everything was normal until around 10 when we received a delivery order. After we prepared the order, I drove out of the parking lot to the given address on the receipt. It was just 9 minutes away. My manager called me when I was about halfway to the destination to tell me that the customer had given the wrong address. I pulled over to the side of the road to write down the new one. Strangely, it was now about a half hour away, in the opposite direction, but I had no choice since I was the only driver, so I went ahead with the delivery. The roads were empty, especially as I drove towards the far edge of town. Houses turned into fields and trees. When I reached the given address, I found single-story houses with most lights off. It felt desolate, and the houses were not the nicest. Arriving at the designated house, I felt an eerie sense as I approached the door. It was quiet, dark, and unsettling. I knocked and knocked, but no one answered. Feeling a bit uneasy, I left the food on the porch near the front door and walked back to my car. That's when I saw a man behind it, peering into the driver's side window. He was older, and when he noticed me, he didn't move. I asked if I could help him with something. He didn't say a word. He just remained silent. Feeling a growing unease, I cautiously walked to the driver's side of my car. The man backed up and stood a few feet away, still staring. I opened the door and rushed inside, and that's when the man started yelling. Looking where he gestured, I saw about 3 guys rushing toward my car from the woods. Panicking, I sped away, narrowly avoiding the man's attempt to stop me. As soon as I drove away, I called the cops and told them what happened, but by the time the cops arrived, the group of guys were all gone. The address was actually a vacant property, and the caller's identity was unknown. The group's intentions remain unresolved, leaving me wondering about that eerie night. I can't help but to think that had things played out differently, I might not be here to share this story. I was driving home late one night, later than I should have been. The road was empty, and the trees on either side seemed to close in, making the highway feel even lonelier. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under my tires. It was just me, the road, and the thick woods surrounding me. The sky was dark, with no stars in sight, and the headlights barely cut through the inky blackness ahead. I was thinking about how much longer I had to go when I noticed something up ahead. It was just a small curve in the road, but as I got closer, I saw a figure standing right in the middle of it. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't have time to think. My reflexes took over, and I swerved hard to the left, trying to avoid hitting whatever or whoever it was. The tires screeched, and I felt the car skid out of control. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight as I fought to regain control. The car finally came to a stop, just inches away from the figure. My heart was pounding in my chest as I sat there trying to catch my breath. I looked around, trying to find the person I almost hit, but there was no one there. The road was empty again, just as it had been before. It was as if the figure had disappeared into thin air. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I was tired after all, and the road had been so quiet and boring. Maybe I just needed to focus. I took a deep breath and started driving again, a little slower this time. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. There, on the side of the road, was the same figure. It was closer now, just standing there watching me. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. It creeped me out to the core. I didn't know what to do, so I just kept driving, trying to ignore it. But every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the figure seemed to be getting closer, like it was following me. My hands started to sweat, and I could feel my heart racing again. I pushed down on the gas pedal, trying to put as much distance between me and whatever that thing was. The road twisted and turned, but no matter how fast I went, the figure stayed with me. It never ran, never moved faster, just kept getting closer every time I looked. It was as if it was playing with me, enjoying the fear it was causing. I couldn't take it anymore. My foot pressed down harder on the gas, the speedometer climbing higher and higher. The trees on either side blurred into a dark wall, and the road ahead seemed to stretch out forever. But no matter how fast I went, the figure was always there, getting closer, inch by inch. Finally, I couldn't see it in the mirror anymore. It was gone, or at least I hoped it was. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm down. I was almost home, just a few more miles to go. I kept telling myself that I was safe now, that whatever it was couldn't hurt me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. As I rounded the final bend before home, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the middle of the road, right in front of my house, was the figure. It was closer than ever, its eyes locked on mine. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. My heart was in my throat as I stared at it, unable to move, unable to think. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. It didn't run, didn't fade away. It was just gone. The road was empty again, and my house stood silent in the distance, as if nothing had happened. I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. But there was no explanation, no reason for any of it. All I knew was that something had followed me, something that wasn't supposed to be there. Eventually, I forced myself to drive the last few feet to my house. I parked the car and rushed inside, locking the doors behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the window, watching the road, waiting for the figure to return. But it never did. Even now, I can't explain what happened that night. I've driven that road many times since then, but I've never seen the figure again. But I know it's still out there, somewhere, waiting. And every time I drive home late at night, I can't help but wonder if it'll come back, watching me from the shadows, getting closer and closer until there's no escape. We had just left the concert, feeling pretty good about the night. It was late, but we didn't care. The energy from the show still buzzed in our veins, and the car was filled with chatter and laughter. I was in the passenger seat, Emily was driving, and our friends Mike and Lisa were in the back. We were heading back to town, driving down a long, empty road that seemed to stretch on forever. The radio was playing some old rock songs, adding to the good vibes. But as we drove deeper into the countryside, the signal started to fade. The music turned into static, and I reached over to switch it off. But just as my hand touched the dial, a strange, distorted voice cut through the noise. "You're not alone. Turn back now before it's too late." We all froze, the laughter dying in our throats. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Mike snorted from the back seat. "Nice try," he said, thinking it was some sort of prank. "Must be one of those weird radio stations." Emily shrugged, and we all kind of laughed it off, even though the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I tried to shake off the unease and focus on the road ahead. But that voice, it didn't feel right. We kept driving, but the radio didn't stop. The voice came back, louder and more urgent. "Turn back now. They're coming. You need to leave." Emily reached out and tried to turn the radio off, but the knob wouldn't budge. No matter what we did, the voice kept coming through, repeating the same warning over and over. "Okay, this is getting creepy," Lisa said from the back, her voice shaky. We were all starting to get a little freaked out. The road ahead was dark, and a thick fog had rolled in, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of us. The trees on either side of the road seemed to close in, their branches reaching out like fingers trying to grab us. Suddenly, the car's headlights flickered, and the engine sputtered. Emily swore under her breath and tried to keep the car going, but it was no use. The lights went out completely, and the engine died, leaving us stranded in the middle of a dark, foggy road. We all began to panic. Emily tried to restart the car, but the engine wouldn't turn over. We were stuck, and the radio was still broadcasting that chilling warning. "You're not alone. They're here. Run!" "What the hell is going on?" Mike said, his voice rising in panic. "This isn't funny anymore." I looked around, trying to see through the fog, but it was so thick that everything beyond the car was just shadows. And then I saw them. At first, I thought it was just the fog playing tricks on my eyes. But as they got closer, I realized they were real. Shadowy figures were emerging from the fog, slowly making their way toward us. I couldn't make out their faces, but there was something menacing about the way they moved, like they had all the time in the world to reach us. "They're getting closer," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. We all stared out the windows, our breaths caught in our throats. There was nowhere to go, and the figures kept coming, their outlines growing sharper as they approached. "Try the car again," I shouted at Emily. She twisted the key in the ignition, but the engine just clicked. Nothing happened. The figures were almost at the car now, their faces still hidden by the fog. But I could feel their eyes on us. "They're right there," Mike yelled, pointing out the window. I could barely breathe. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The radio crackled again, and the voice was frantic now. "Run! Get out of there!" But how? We were stuck. The car wouldn't start, and these things, whatever they were almost on us. Suddenly, one of the figures reached the car and slammed a hand against the window. We all screamed, the sound piercing the silence of the night. The hand left a streak of something dark on the glass, and the figure leaned in closer, trying to peer inside. I could see now that they weren't normal people. Their faces were twisted, almost inhuman, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. They were hunting us and we were trapped. "Emily, we need to get out of here," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. She was shaking, but she nodded and tried the ignition one more time. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The lights flickered back on, and the figures recoiled, hissing as they stepped back from the car. "Go! Go! Go!" Mike screamed. Emily slammed her foot on the gas and the car lurched forward. The figures tried to grab at us, their hands scraping against the windows, but we sped past them, the tires screeching on the pavement. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away, the fog and the figures far behind us. The radio had gone silent and the road ahead was clear, but none of us spoke. We were too shaken by what had just happened. When we finally got back to town, we parked the car and just sat there, trying to make sense of it all. But there was no explanation for what we had seen, no reason for why it happened. All I know is that I'll never forget that night, and I'll never drive down that road again. Whatever was out there in the fog, it wasn't human, and it was hunting us. Thanks for watching. Don't miss out on more spine-chilling tales. Subscribe now for weekly scares. Hit that red button and join our journey into the unknown.